All right, you all are probably being asked if you're cool being recorded. And so if you guys want credit, you need to try and keep your cameras on. That's the rule with DPOR, so that I can see that you're there and actively engaged and paying attention. We'll drop a link to, I'll drop the form, the D4 form into the chat here in a minute. So you guys can fill that on your computers and then get it back to us. And then we'll have a list of attendees as well from the Zoom, which we can use to submit for credit. So we are close to 96 people here. I'll find out if my account is good for more than 100 in a minute. Otherwise, the people that got here after 104 will just be out of luck. So what I'm going to do, given the number of people that we got, if everybody, and we've all done Zooms and things before now, so I think we're getting used to how these work, but if you all mute yourselves as best you can, and if you can put your questions in the chat as we go along, I think it'll be easier to follow along with the chat questions than trying to discern who's talking and who's shouting things out. Also, I've pulled out the key aspects of the contract and put them in the slides. But if you want, you might want to pull up your own copy. If you've got dual monitors or something, or if you haven't, you might want to pull up a copy of the contract for yourself to sort of follow along if you want to have everything in context. So if you want to stay on, I think we're going to take close to an hour and a half, probably. This slide deck has been taught by some of my colleagues already. They said it took them a little over an hour. I tend to talk a lot more. I like to hear myself talk. I can't help it. So we may go a little longer. The class is actually approved for 2 hours of credit. So that's probably fine, given that we're not going to take a break. We'll just go straight through. If you need a copy of the contract or don't know where to get one, I am going to put that in the chat right now. A link to the educational version of the form. So that's in the chat. Oh, I went to the waiting room participants. Didn't mean to do that. Let me do this. Send it to everyone in the meeting. All right. So with that, given we're at 100 members, and it looks like people have stopped getting into the room, which means that we probably are at the limit, which is great, and great to see everybody here. I'm going to go ahead and get into the presentation. So most of you probably know who I am if you found your way here, but I am Marcus Simon. I'm a founding member of EKKO Title here in McLean, at the McLean office. I was on the NVAR Standard Forms Committee from 2004 to 2014. That used to be a more relevant period of time as far as the contract goes. So I spent about 10 years working on these. Now it's been about 7 years since I've been off. But I do have a little bit of understanding about how some of these things came to be and the process that folks go over. And so I was actually helped make the decision in 2012 to stop releasing the contract whenever it was done, but to try and do it twice a year. We do a January 1 release of new forms and a July 1 release of new forms now. July 1 because that's when new laws in Virginia go into effect. And so if we have any statutory changes that are required to be made, we make those in the July 1 release. But the big changes we like to do in January, excuse me, because it's a relatively slow time. I don't think if we were doing this in the middle of July, I'd get 100 of y'all able to take an hour, hour and a half to get on a Zoom meeting and learn about it. So we have the advantage that we are able to do this in the wintertime when things are a little bit slower. So this contract makes some big changes. So before I get to the page one, I'm going to pause the share here for just a second. So the big difference with this contract is this was written, I say the difference. This contract was written for really the last 2 years, really the last year and a half's market in mind. And it's really about trying to solve a lot of problems you have when you have a big one-sided seller's market. We have a real shortage of inventory, and you've got buyers kind of willing to say and do anything to get ratified, right? And then what's been happening is that causes a mismatch in expectations, right? Or you get folks trying to game the system. Well, it doesn't say, the contract doesn't say I can't do this, so therefore I can, right? And so those are the kinds of things that they were really trying to address. It reminds me a little bit, and Paul and John, I see some of you guys have been doing this for a while. In 2006, we finally released a contract that solved a lot of the problems we had during that 2004-5, 3-4-5 market, where people were waiving everything, but the contract didn't really have a way to waive the financing or the appraisal contingency and so forth. So we finally put check boxes in 2006. By the end of 2007, nobody needed the check boxes. Everybody was getting all the contingencies they wanted because the market had shifted. I hope that the fact that we've finally gotten ourselves a really good contract that addresses all the needs of the last seller's market doesn't mean that we're now about to switch over to a buyer's market where some of these things will be less significant. But we'll see if our timing was bad or not. Let's jump into some of the changes and get right to it, though, with that context. So I want to share again. And we'll go on with it. So also on here, and you guys, most of you know this, you know how to reach me by email or by cell phone and text me. Texting me is really the best way to get a hold of me. If you guys have questions about these things, I try and be as available as I can. I also tried to fix these charts for the most part so that my head fits in a blank space. It looks like I just exactly got it right on this one. So first thing you'll notice about the contract that's different from before is we've added new language that talks about who represents the buyer or seller, and we got rid of the language on dual or designated agency and sub-agency. Sub-agency isn't really a thing that exists in Virginia anymore. So we just talked about who represents the clients and deleted the language about dual agency in the new contract. Not a big change there. That's more of a technical change, just trying to reflect the reality and get rid of some legacy language. And you'll see that as another theme throughout. We tried to get rid of some obsolete language from the contract, which I think is great. Anybody who's been sat through a real estate closing with a mortgage, there's a stack of papers this thick, and they almost never take anything out, right? They add things for all kinds of circumstances, but they almost never pull any of those documents out. We actually do that in a couple of places here, which you'll see about in just a minute. All right, so we reorganized the price and financing paragraph. And so you'll look at the old familiar language on top. What you did was you always sort of added things up to the sales price, which was sort of the bottom line. I don't know if y'all can see my cursor or not, but you start with down payment, then you add the financing to that, and the second trust financing, and then if there's a seller held trust, and then you had the total of all those three numbers here. But these two numbers were supposed to add up to the sales price, and then you would subtract out the seller's subsidy. That's a relatively recent addition. As some of you guys know, we added the seller subsidy language, I think maybe 2 contracts ago, which is interesting because it got missed. And I can't tell you how many people didn't realize that there was a seller subsidy because it just looked like an extra number on this list. So what we've got now is we have the sales price on top, right? So it's pretty easy to compare contracts and look at everything in the front part. So we start with the sales price, and we're going to work down about how it's made up. So we're starting with $1 million sales price with a $200,000 down payment, $600,000 first trust, a $2,000 second trust. And so the total financing is going to be this. That's how we arrived at it. And then the seller subsidy line is still there at the bottom. And that's going to be seller's net reduced by. And that number goes at the very bottom there. So all the C number, B and C will add up to A, and then you subtract out D, if that makes sense to everybody. So with that, I'm going to launch one of my first polls and see if everybody's paying attention here and listening. So you guys get to weigh in. Do you think it's better to have the sales price on top or on the bottom? Everybody knows how to work the polls. It's coming in quick. Got about 60, 70. All right. Don't lose your connection here because we're right at 100 people, which I think is the maximum I'm allowed on the Zoom. So If you get kicked out, somebody might take your place in the waiting room. So maintain your connection. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And it looks like we had 79% like it better on top. So that's a popular change. We'll share that with the folks on the forms committee. I've been responsible for some changes that you guys liked when I was on the forms committee. Somebody else was responsible for the ones you didn't like. That's going to be my story. And I'm sticking to it. All right. And John's letting me know you guys can't see the cursor. So let me go on. But that does tell me that everybody's paying attention, which is nice. So I stop sharing the results. And I want to. How about that? All right, you guys don't see the poll anymore. All right, good. All right, so also in price and financing, we have made a technical change just to remove redundant language. And this was language that I don't think people knew was redundant, but it was, I think, a good catch. And it shows that this particular forms committee, I think, did a very good job of sifting through some of these repetitive language items and getting them out. So we used to say in paragraph 2D that the seller agrees to comply with the reasonable lender requirements. That language is gone because we have this language in the title paragraph, which has always been there. And you probably didn't know it. I certainly, I gotta admit, I don't remember seeing it there. But it says the seller will sign such affidavits, lien waivers, tax certifications, and other documents as may be required by the lender, title insurance company, settlement agent, or government authority. So that's actually better language than 3. 3 just says reasonable lender requirements. And then we would have fights over what was a reasonable requirement or not. So rather than have the vague and confusing language in 2D, got rid of that and stuck with the more specific language that's already in the title paragraph. All right, if anybody has any questions about that, pop them in the chat. I think that's a pretty straightforward change. Big changes are in access to the property, right? And this is, again, this goes to what I was saying earlier about the big theme of this contract being, let's stop some of the excesses that we saw or solve some of the complaints that we heard during this really hot market. And Julie Burke says you might find that as that language is labeled as 2E rather than 2D. Judd, I don't know if you're looking at the new contract or the old contract, but it was, I think it was 2D in the old. It might be now 2E in the new contract, but it doesn't have the which was 2D is now 2E, but doesn't have the language about repairs. Yeah, you've got the new version, Judd, and the new version. What was 2D in the old contract is 2E minus that last highlighted sentence. Okay, access to property though. This was a question that I got, I can't tell you how many times. And I'm sure they got it at the NVAR hotline, and I heard it discussed in our real estate forum, our Facebook real estate forum as well. But when do I have to let people into the property? How many times do I have to let them in? Basically, they waived everything and told me they were paying all cash and waiving all their inspections. They didn't care. They just wanted the house. And now that we're under contract, they're sending all kinds of people to the property to do all kinds of things. And it's making me very nervous. I don't want to let them in. Do I have to? Right? So we actually got rid of the old paragraph 11. So this is not the new one. This is from the old contract. This is the language that's gone. And it says, we used to say the seller will provide the broker, buyer, inspectors representing the buyer, and representatives of lending institutions for appraisal purposes, reasonable access to the property to comply with this contract. We'd fight over that all the time, right? Well, an appraiser has shown up, but the contract's not contingent on an appraisal. So do we have to let the appraiser in? Is it reasonable for him to be here to comply with the contract, or is he just here to facilitate financing? Other inspectors, well, there's no home inspection contingency, but it doesn't say if it's necessary for that or so forth. So this was a subject of a lot of fighting and disagreement and no real good answers, frankly. So we've now broken this out into 4 different, very specific areas where you saw the most friction. Part of it's going to be in the new appraisal contingency paragraph. Part of it's going to go in paragraph 10, where we deal with property maintenance and condition. Part of it is going to be in paragraph 17, which is the wood destroying insect inspection. And part of it is going to be in the inspection contingency removal piece. And we'll see how those are all treated differently here in just a minute. All right. So the appraisal, the new language. So this is the new paragraph 2F. So this is the 122 version. This is now what's 2F. And it says, first of all, it's on page 1 of the contract now, right? We moved that up right under financing so that you could tell right away when you're comparing contracts, if they don't use the new optional cover sheet, which we'll get to at the end. If we just look at the front of all your contracts, makes it easy. I had an agent tell me once back in 2005, back in the other last hot market, she'd get offers on condos and she'd put them in 2 stacks, those with contingencies and those without. And the ones without slid off the end of the desk. And that was all you saw of those. So you have multiple offers. It's helpful to be able to look and line things up by the front page. But the new language says that it's contingent or is not contingent on an appraisal. If it is contingent on financing and or appraisal, seller will provide the appraiser reasonable access to the property for appraisal purposes. So notice, this is the appraisal contingency. It's separate from the financing contingency. And in fact, you may have this in a cash offer, or you may have somebody who's waiving financing but wants to preserve appraisal. But if it's contingent on either, or you can waive the appraisal but have a financing contingency. But if it's contingent on either, the seller has to provide the appraiser reasonable access to the property for appraisal purposes, right? Because even if the contract's not contingent on the appraisal and the buyer understands and agrees that they're going to have to make up the difference, and they may not be able to finance as much money because of a low appraisal, they'll make up the difference themselves in cash, the appraiser still needs to get there. We still need to get an appraiser in so that the loan can be made. The lender's not going to make the loan without an appraisal, even if there's no contingency. So you understand why, even though this is about the appraisal contingency, the access piece of it applies if it's contingent on either financing and or appraisal. Seller will provide the reasonable access to the property. If the contract is not contingent on financing and or appraisal, then the seller has a decision to make, right? And actually, who's making this decision at this point? It's really not the seller, it's the buyer who's writing the offer, right? So if you're writing an offer for your buyer, you've got to decide when you make the offer what you're going to ask the seller for. You're going to say, I want you to provide the appraiser reasonable access for appraisal purposes or will not. The idea is to smoke that issue out, right? Early on in the process and say, look, what usually causes this to be a problem is the element of surprise. Somebody says, I'm paying all cash for the property. And they plan to, or they have the ability to. And then they go to talk to their broker about getting the money out to buy the house. And the broker says, why are you going to take your money out of the market right now? The market's going great. Yeah, you got great credit. You got plenty of money. Interest rates are like 2 3/4%. Why wouldn't you just take out a mortgage? Just go borrow the money. Let's not liquidate your stocks right now. It's not a good time to do that, right? But yeah, so you would have this happen from time to time. Folks would either innocently, like a situation like that, where they just realized afterwards that it wasn't a smart idea to pay cash financially. Sometimes you had folks that had no intention of paying cash, but they knew that in a competitive situation, it was going to make their offer stronger or appear stronger if they could say they were paying all cash. And then what happens is the sellers, at home drinking coffee on reading the newspaper on Tuesday morning at 9:30, and bang, bang, bang on the door. Somebody who shows up and says, I'm with the lender. I'm here to do an appraisal of the property, right? And then you guys get the call. You guys use your reaction buttons and hit the raise your hand button if you've ever gotten that phone call that says, yes, I'm here to, somebody's doing an appraisal. I thought you said this was all cash, right? So that's what I see some hands going up. That's the situation that we're trying to avoid with this language. So you've got to tip your hand early. And also, by the way, it says to that buyer who again, maybe innocently decided that it's not a smart idea to pay all cash, you can go back to them and say, hey, listen, you need to negotiate this now with the seller. because we agreed up front that the seller is not going to provide access to that appraiser. So if you want to go finance it now, we need to go back to them and have a conversation about what's going on. John has a question in the chat, which I think we have a poll about coming up. So I think great minds think alike on that question. So we'll get to that for a second. All right. In fact, here's time for the polls. Let's see if I can get this to work. Next poll, appraisal provisions. It's 3 questions. Have you ever received a cash offer that wasn't? This is making up for me. Usually when I'm in a class, I'll survey the group by asking everybody to show their hands, but since there are too many of you for me to even see on one screen, I'm asking them this way. Question 2, do you think a real cash offer with no appraiser access is either stronger and would take less money if they click no, or stronger but not worth giving the buyer a discount, right? So in other words, or 3, no difference as long as the buyer has proof of funds. And then the third question is not really a question. It's just me messing up doing the poll. So if you guys want to try and answer the first 2 questions as we go. It's interesting that people are answering question 3 too in equal amounts. So thank you. Thank you all for playing along. So we'll give everybody a chance to weigh in. About half of you all have answered the questions. Oh, you have to answer 3 or you can't submit. So go ahead, pick whatever you want for question 3. It's interesting. I'm learning something about the value of ballot placement. Choice 1 is getting more votes than choice 2. So I'll have to try and do what I can to stay first on the ballot when I'm up for re-election. All right. Looks like most everybody's figuring that out. We've got about 78 answers in. And yes, you have to answer 3. So pick something, anything. All right, I'm going to give a little extra time so that people have a chance to answer the question the way they want to.
I don't know what number 3 means.
Yeah, it's just a mistake. I must have clicked enter by when I was making the polls. So I left a blank one. So just pick one of the other options in number 3. Don't worry. All right. I think we've got about 87. So I think everybody who wants to answer probably has. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results. So answer to question 1, yes. Yeah, so about 14 of you out of 100 said, 14 out of 87 that answered, 16% said they found out that an offer wasn't really cash when they got a call from an appraiser about it. About 24, about a third of you have had, yeah, it's happened, but it was no big deal because the buyer gave us a warning. And about half of you, a little more than half of you have never had that happen, which is good news. So this is the more interesting question, I think. Do you think a real cash offer with no appraiser access, so I say real, right? So they've checked no, we don't need an appraiser to come by ever, is stronger to the point that you would agree to take less money. So if it wasn't maybe the highest offer, but they agreed that it was cash, they wouldn't need an appraiser to come in. Only about 10 of you thought that was something you would do. But another 31 of you thought, yeah, it's stronger, but it's not worth giving the buyer a discount over. I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time. As long as I know I've got a good source of funds, what difference does it make? And then 46 of you, about half, said it really doesn't matter at all. As long as I know the buyer has the money to close, it doesn't bother me if they want to try and get a loan and bring an appraiser through. So now the question is, that's sort of the opposite of John's question, which was, do you guys think, and we can maybe find a way to put this one in, but do you all think that you weaken yourself by checking the yes, there might be an appraiser access? Do you think that that's going to get you pushback from sellers? Now, if most of you guys think like the way you think about yourselves is the same, it indicates that probably at least half folks don't think it makes any difference. But there is a cohort out there that would think that they would be received. So, and Meredith's among that group that thinks there's no difference if it's checked. And so Rebecca wants to, do they have to disclose they're getting a mortgage even if they are waiving it? even if no appraisal is necessary. So that's a different question. So if they're getting a loan, a no appraisal loan, maybe they're doing a drive-by or something like that. And so there's not going to be a need for access to the property. That is not a necessary disclosure. Maybe they're getting a loan on another property. And that happens sometimes, right? Or they're taking out a home equity loan on their existing house, and that's what they're going to use. If there's no need for access to the property, it doesn't cost the seller any more money, then there's no reason that you can't borrow money. But the big issue, and this is what the reason for this new language, the rub was in, it did require, even if there was no cost to it financially, it required appraiser access to the property, and that's where we were having friction problems. Tanya says she usually spells it out if there's no financing contingency, but the appraiser needs access. Again, this is that's always been the best practice, to either put it in other terms or put it in an addendum or put it in your cover letter. The seller reserves the right, or rather the buyer reserves the right to finance the project, conventional financing or something like that. So this kind of, again, just makes that standard. So we're all doing it the same way. Ken thinks some agents will use it as a differentiator. So yeah, that's a conversation you need to have with your client up front. And again, that's all good stuff, right? And I think we always sort of, my go-to answer on these questions is that's a tough situation you're in. It would have been better if we had all avoided this situation by matching everybody's expectations, having that conversation earlier. And this will force the conversation with that buyer that says, hey, I know you think it's no big deal to go get a loan, but there are some things we need to think about ahead of time before we decide to make this offer all cash. And Sandra thinks, by the way, it would make a difference to the seller, right? And that's another good point. Like, you may not think it's a big deal because you see this happen all the time as an agent, but ultimately it's going to be the seller's decision when they're picking the contracts. So Rebecca says, but section 2 asks how the sales price is going to be determined. You're stating you're not getting financing by putting it in. I've been surprised. Yeah, I think the question, if you do something other than what you said on paragraph 2, we'll get to this. There's actually language on what's sufficient tender of performance. So that would be, although that, you didn't say you were financing, you said you were paying 100% of it in the down payment and you finance it. At the end of the day, if the money shows up at the title company, there's no harm to the seller. So there's no real basis for them to get out of the contract. All right. I have 30 minutes in and we're on paragraph 10. So we'll use at least an hour and then some. I hope everybody's cool with that. Property maintenance and condition. This is always, I'll give you a whole class on property maintenance and condition. We often do. But the new language in paragraph 10 at the bottom, and my head's, I can shrink down a little bit so we can see all of it. So we have the same language we've always had about date of offer, date of home inspection. I could do an hour on which of those to pick, but we're not going to do that today. We have the new language at the bottom though that says, if this contract is contingent upon home inspections or other inspections of the property, seller will, actually doesn't say the because we're taking out words. Seller will provide broker, buyer, and inspectors retained by the buyer reasonable access to the property, to conduct home inspections and or other inspections of the property. All right, so this is where we're putting in the access to the property. Now, if it's not contingent, what we do have now, which is new, is if it's not contingent, right? So this is all new. If it's not contingent on a home inspection or other inspections of the property, the default, and this is in bold, says the seller will not provide access to the property to anyone for the purpose of conducting home inspections. I move this way so that I get away from the words there. So the default is if there's no inspections, then we're not going to provide access to anyone for the purpose of conducting inspections, except for walkthrough inspection as provided below. However, this is bold again, if checked, the seller will provide broker, buyer, and licensed, if applicable. The if applicable goes to the professional insured inspector. So if they need a license, they'll have a license. Retained by the buyer, reasonable access to the property to conduct home inspections or other inspections of property beginning on then it gives you a time frame. So we have some definitiveness on when that can happen. Nothing in this subparagraph creates a contingency not otherwise agreed to by the parties. So this is, again, this is our like third attempt at trying to get people to stop putting in home inspection for information purposes only, right? Because what we thought that meant, and I always sort of assumed it meant, people would write home inspection for informational purposes only, but they really, or what they often meant was they wanted a home inspection. They weren't going to ask for any repairs, but if they didn't, excuse me one second, but if they didn't like the property, they could still get out. And so to try and fix that misconception about what home inspection for information purposes only meant, we added the option to void only to the home inspection contingency, right? So we created an option A and a B, and that solved that one category where people were saying home inspection purposes for information only, but they really meant they wanted a home inspection with the opportunity to void the contract. Let's see if I can drop a whole document in the chat. I know there's a way to drop a document into the chat, but I haven't been able to do it yet, but I'll figure it out before we go. So that's one of the problems we're trying to solve here. But I guess what's happening in this particular market is people are saying, well, I know it's not contingent on that. And I know that it's not, I know I have a home inspection contingency, but I really want to know what it is that I'm buying so I can start to line up contractors ahead of time. And so I can decide, if there is an appraisal issue, let's say, for instance, how much money I can afford to make up or things like that. And so this new language creates a time frame for doing whatever that information. If I just do a straight, let me see what I see is what I get. You can put it there. The start and end dates are important too, right? Because what would happen also is, how many of y'all have had folks, and I don't have a poll for this, but how many of y'all have had folks that have said, I want to get my inspector in for informational purposes only before I get the homeowners association docs, right? Why would they want to do that? Well, because there is an out, right? And so Kyle's raising his hand, I think, to say, yes, that's happened to me. Or how many of you have called me and said, hey, they want to get somebody into the property. Do I have to let them in now? Or can I wait until the condo docs? It's been 3 days since they've got the condo docs before I let them in. And I've said, yeah, the contract says reasonable access. It doesn't say when. And I think it's reasonable as a seller to say, hey, I don't want you to create a backdoor contingency. But all that was just me guessing, right? I don't know what a judge would say about any of that. There were no real good answers to those questions. So that's what the time frame is for. So keep that in mind, by the way. If somebody says, hey, so you have a house in a homeowners association, and somebody says, I want to have a home inspector just do a quick, for informational purposes only, look through the property. And we just like to do like the first 3 days after ratification, just get it over with, right? Does that sound reasonable? Like, oh, okay, yeah, let them in soon and get it over with. On the other hand, if that's inside of your other non-waivable HOA or condo doc period of time, then you probably want to use those blanks to say, no, after we're hard, essentially. After all the other contingencies are gone, if this is really going to be an effective waiver of the home inspection, we need to wait till all your other outs are gone. Then I'll let you in, and then I'll give you so many days, because I know it's not always easy to get inspected the one day you want. Does everybody understand what we're doing there? I think Jane has said that she outlines if the buyer wants an appraisal or decides to pursue financing, the seller will provide reasonable access. She's been doing that. Jane's been doing this herself over the years, which is good. Tanya says that there are a number of games that agents will play, request access to show family members, measure the furniture, get their handyman in, and so forth within that HOA contingency. So yeah, again, if you're a savvy listing agent, you've seen all those tricks before, and be careful about doing that. Rosie says boxes that need to be checked need to be formatted so that they are not buried in the middle of the paragraph. I will take that feedback back. I understand that is an issue, and so we can get that worked on. Let's see. Meredith says yes. Jane's agreeing. So I'm behind, so I'm not sure exactly what you guys are agreeing with. Nevier attorney said reasonable is what both parties can agree on. Yes and no. I mean, there are situations. If I say you cannot come in except between the hours of 12:05 and 12:15 in the middle of the night, And that's the only time I'll let you, that's the only thing I'll agree to. I think that's on its face unreasonable, but generally, given that nobody's going to bother to litigate it, as a practical matter, it's what everybody agrees to. Susan wants to know, if you are representing the buyer, would you try and have the time from the date of ratification to settlement? If I'm representing the buyer, then yeah, of course, you want the broadest possible date, right? From date of ratification to the settlement date. I get my inspector in there anytime. On the other hand, keep in mind that you try not to write these offers with blanks in them, right? So here's the practical issue, because it's the seller, in theory, it's the seller checking the box, right? But in reality, you guys are doing this electronically. You're checking the box, you're filling in the dates in your offer. Now, you probably want to try and have a conversation with the listing agent ahead of time about what you're going to ask for and what the seller can live with. But I think in this really competitive market, most of you would agree that you want to try and have your contracts as ratification ready as possible, right? You don't want to have somebody come back to you and then you initial that and get it back to them before you can have a ratified contract. So just another small note, whenever there's these blanks and check boxes, try and have a conversation with the listing agent, pre-negotiate what they think they're, and of course, sometimes they won't be able to tell you. They're like, look, it's up to my seller. But I can tell you that ratification to settlement date, I'm going to advise them not to take that because that's too much exposure. So again, but Susan, it's the question again, if the market changes, if we go back to a market like we had in 2008 or 2009, then yeah, you can put anything you want in those blanks and people are just happy to get an offer. All right. Paragraph 10 is about walkthrough. So this goes on now to talk about walkthrough. It says, regardless of whether the contract is contingent on a home inspection or other inspections, the seller will provide the broker and buyer reasonable access to the property to make walkthrough inspections within 7 days prior to settlement and or occupancy. So here's who they'll provide it to. It doesn't really say only, but it kind of does, right? Seller provide broker and buyer reasonable access to the property to make walkthrough inspections within 7 days prior to settlement and or occupancy. So what this is meant to say, I think maybe frankly, it would have been better if we'd said only. Now that I'm just thinking of this now as I'm teaching it to you guys. It doesn't say who can't come in, but you'll see later on how, if you read the whole contract together, it has to mean only. It used to say buyer or buyer's representative. Now it says the buyer and the broker, not the contractor, not the inspector, not the cousin, unless otherwise agreed. You see that again in the home inspection removal addendum. But if somebody's waived their home inspection, don't bring a home inspector to your walkthrough. I'm not going to ask again how many times, well, if you want to, a show of hands, or a smiley face or whatever for, or frowny. We do have frowny faces, but anyway, that happens sometimes. I know that it's happened because I've gotten the phone calls about it. I literally had somebody ask me if they could call the police and tell the inspector to go away. So sometimes it gets a little bit dramatic. And Melanie wants to know what difference does it make if they bring the inspector if there's no options left to void as a buyer? And the answer is just, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm kind of with you, Melanie. Let them through. I mean, if they want to default, they can default over this, or they can default over something else. They're still going to be in default. Some people will still have the mistaken impression with walkthrough that you can find things that certain things have to be in normal working order, which they no longer have to be in normal working order. Yeah, because the buyer is only supposed to be searching for changes, as John points out, between whatever date they put in and the date of ratification. You don't need a home inspector for that. All right, but in the removal addendum, it's a little bit different, right? So this says, essentially, regardless of whether it's contingent on a home inspection or not, only the buyer and the broker get to come through on the walkthrough date. But our new home inspection contingency removal, we've added a new sentence that says, if the seller agrees to make any repairs in this addendum, then the seller will provide the broker, the buyer, and licensed, if applicable, professional insured inspectors retained by the buyer. So this is the same language we have in our contingency, reasonable access to the property to make final walkthrough inspection or inspections within 7 days prior to settlement and or occupancy, right? So this says if you have asked for repairs to be made and you don't know, I don't know. How many of you have had clients that have said this? I guess it's fixed. It looks like it's fixed, but I'm not. I'm a lawyer. I'm a dentist. I'm a accountant. I don't know whether this is fixed or not. I want my inspector to come back in. Or how many of you all have had clients probably lately? I've got a lot with remote closings. Clients that have seen the property once, but they aren't even able to go back themselves. They're like, well, why don't you go do the walkthrough for me? How many of y'all want to do that without maybe having an inspector or somebody come with you to check off on those repairs? So this says you're allowed to do that explicitly when you have done repairs. Keep that in mind for your sellers. If the seller agrees to make the repairs, then they need to be prepared for the idea that a home inspector or somebody else may be coming to inspect that work at walkthrough, because moving day, you guys all know this, moving day is a stressful day for sellers, right? And it's good every now and then to sell your own house and go through all that. I remember the first time I sold a house and the movers came and I wasn't quite ready for them. So I'm like, take all this. It can't be that much left. I'll take the rest of it myself. And 25 carloads later, between Reston and Vienna, where I was moving, I finally at 2 in the morning was had most everything out. And then I remember that there was the attic where I'd stuck some of the luggage and had to go back for that at 4 in the morning. So it's a stressful time for sellers. And then all of a sudden, this home inspector shows up with his tool belt and his testing devices and he's, his headlamp on. It's just, it can put a seller over the edge, right? And send everybody into a tizzy. So make sure they're prepared for this language. All right, last thing on access, and then we'll have another poll. Termites. This has been another issue of consternation for folks. So we've tried to get this improved. So a couple new things, licensed. So the pest control firm now has to be licensed. We didn't have that language before. I think almost everybody you guys use is licensed. So that's probably not going to be a big deal. It's not going to change the way you do business. Means you can't go and I'll get Uncle Harry come around and say, I see bugs. If the WDI report recommends treatment and or repair. So if the report itself, the WDI report says no treatment recommended or no repairs recommended, you're done. But if it says treatment or repair recommended, seller will provide the buyer, the broker, and any representatives of their licensed pest control firm selected by the appropriate party above reasonable access to the property to perform the inspections, treatment, and or repair. So since we got rid of access, they're like, well, what if there is termite treatment? We have to let the termite company back again to do the treatment. And this is where we say, yes, they have to be able to come back and do the treatments or the repairs. And then we added a language that says, just like in the home inspection contingency removal, unless the parties agree in writing, all treatment and or repairs will be performed by a contractor licensed to do the type of work required. This comes up with carpenter bees sometimes. Anybody ever had a client go out to the hardware store and buy the carpenter bee powder and just stuff it in the holes themselves, say, I did it, or fill the holes with putty, or sill plates. It's amazing how many sill plates there are in a house, these super fascia board, things that are superficial, they just cover something up and homeowners want to go to Home Depot and fix that themselves. And then the buyer gets there and says, this isn't done, or it's not done right, or doesn't come with a warranty or whatever. So now we've got language that says very clearly, you got to have this stuff done professionally, unless everybody's agreed otherwise in writing. All right. Lisa says, it sounds almost like it's encouraging the buyers to bring back their inspector to the walkthrough if they had a home inspection. I mean, if you don't have an inspection contingency, you can't have that, or is the contract silent on that? It basically says that you can't, right? Yeah, it basically says that again, let me back up for a minute, because this is what they're trying to do, right? Whether they succeed or not, you guys will decide. We'll find out over practice. But the language is, if it's not contingent on a home inspection, no access for a home inspector, but the buyer broker will have reasonable access. Oh, that's the superficial one. Here it is, the walkthrough, right? They say buyer broker reasonable access if there's at the walkthrough. So the only way you get the inspector back is if the seller's agreed. If the seller agrees to make repairs, the seller will provide the buyer broker and licensed inspector access. So I think reading those two things together, right? You've got your paragraph 10, which says, regardless of whether it's contingent or not, then there's no act, it's the buyer and the broker. Only if the seller agrees to make repairs will they provide the buyer, broker, and these others access to the property. I would read those two things together to say, if there's no home inspection contingency, then in that case, the seller hasn't agreed to make any repairs under a home inspection contingency removal, then they would not be allowed to bring the home inspector with them. I could be wrong, but we will see. And that's what they mean to say. Again, it doesn't say only, and if you don't have a home inspection contingency, then you don't have a home inspection contingency addendum or a removal addendum, right? And so since it doesn't say only, I still think you probably will have some folks that say, yeah, buyer and broker, but it doesn't say only buyer and broker. And reasonable means that the broker needed to bring an inspector with them. So that may not have solved that problem. I know what they were trying to say there, but I do see the argument that you could still do it even without a home inspection contingency. All right, let's do a poll about access. I'm going to go to the next poll. I'm going to proofread it because I can actually still make sure I don't have any empty questions. I do not have any empty questions. Okay, so I'm going to launch the 3-question poll. Have you ever brought a home inspector to walk through? 2, have you ever had a seller try to refuse access to inspectors at walkthrough? So somebody showed up and somebody said, nope, they can't come in. 3, would you allow an inspector without a contingency just to look around, right? So that's one of the questions where you have the seller has the choice, and they can fill in the blank for the time period. But do you ever think it's a good idea to let an inspector in just to look around? We got about 66 of 98 participants, 69 have gotten all their answers in. Okay, the first question, have you ever brought an inspector to walk through? Looks like only about a third, a little over a third of you typically have done that. Only about a dozen or so of you have had somebody actually refuse access to the inspector or attempt to. Most of you agree with the sort of biased answer, no, nothing good can come from it. It is sort of, in the law, we have something called a leading question. Sometimes we have a leading answer, right? When it's a poll. All right, so we've got 88 of 96 having answered. Some of you might be on the phone or reading your emails or something else, which is fine. So we're going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results so everybody can see. So yeah, again, about 33 have had that. About a third of you, a little more than a third have had that, have done it under one circumstance or another. A little over half of you have never occurred to you to bring the home inspector to the walkthrough. Only about a dozen or so of you have had somebody refuse access. And I kind of, I'm kind of like Melanie. Maybe I'm just a laid back guy. My staff tells me my New Year's resolution was to quit caffeine. And they tell me I'm a lot nicer person now that I've been off the caffeine. But I'm kind of like, sure, if they want to bring an inspector, let them through. But I also get that there's really not a good thing that can come from that. I mean, they could find something that really upsets the buyer, or the buyer could get a case of buyer's remorse. They could try and find some sort of way to sabotage it, or they could say, no, I'm not closing, and I'm not signing a release of deposit, and I'm not doing anything because I found mold or something in the basement, or what looks like mold. I'm just not going to do it. And who needs that aggravation, right? I think that's the attitude of most sellers and most listing agents. Even if they can't do anything about it, they can make things miserable for everybody. So they can have their inspector come in after they take possession of the house and after my seller gets his money. Buyer representations is now part of paragraph 2. It used to be paragraph 15. It's an odd thing. I mean, there's a statutory requirement that people disclose whether they intend to buy the property, or that you try and find out as a broker, whether it's being used for residential purposes or for as a principal residence or not. It matters in relatively few contexts. It matters to lenders. I know some lenders on here. You guys need to know that. You can rely on that for whether you're doing an owner occupied financing or investment financing. I guess in a hot market, from a seller's perspective, generally principal residence financing is a little easier to get, a little less expensive than second home financing or investment property financing. With investment property, sometimes it's a little more intrusive appraisal, or sometimes they need to look at what rental comps are and things like that. So there's a little more risk, again, marginally more risk when it's not their primary residence. So it matters to the seller in that sense. It matters a lot to the seller in FIRPTA cases because particularly if the property is under $300,000 or less, it's exempt from FIRPTA withholding if the buyer is using it as their principal residence. The withholding amount between 300 and $1 million is reduced to 10% versus 15% if it's to be a primary residence of the buyer. I don't know why FIRPTA cares, but it matters in those cases about how much money is going to be withheld. Denise Johnson, Denise, you were saying that some sellers are very interested in that. Oh, whether who's gonna own the property afterwards. I guess is what you're saying. Yeah, some sellers do. I mean, they want to know whether it's going to be a tear down, for instance, or not. I had a seller recently who sold a house to a builder and really didn't want to tell their neighbors. I guess they're going to find out soon. They were really embarrassed that it was going to be torn down in a big, minimum lot line mansion was going to go up in its place, but the money was too good. $1 million for an empty lot in McLean was just crazy. So they couldn't say no, but they were embarrassed. But it's interesting that sellers do care what their neighbors think about what comes after them and whether it's going to be an investment property or not. So it is material, I think, to people. Let's see. And John says you need to be careful about the length of the rent back. That could put a buyer in jeopardy too. Yeah. All right. And that goes to this issue. The reason that's related to this issue of whether it's going to be occupied or not. If they say they intend to occupy it, but if you get a too long of a rent back period, you say you're offering, everybody's being very generous. Yeah, I'll give you 45, I'll give you 90 days. I'll give you 3 months to go find a new place. I know it's hard. We don't care. We just need this house now. That's going to mess up your financing because most lenders are going to only allow a 60-day maximum rent back period if it's owner occupied financing. Sorry, it took me a second to pick up what you were putting down, but I figured it out. All right, another big change that has nothing to do with access. So we're not really going in numerical order through the contract. The slide deck is more thematic. So we're going to a different topic now. We sort of solved all the access changes, right? We haven't solved them. We've dealt with all of those. The deposit paragraph says the buyer fails to timely. So this is language I've been agitating for. Those of you that follow the real estate forum, the EKKO forum on Facebook know I've been agitating for this for a while. So I was glad to see this. About 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I don't know. I'm old now. Maybe it was 10. But I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. We added language that tried to reflect the reality of people using e-signing services that used to be. How many of you guys, give me a show of hands, how many of you remember when you would sit down at a table at a dining room or a kitchen or a restaurant with the clients, you write out the contract by hand on thick three sheets, like there was a white and a yellow and a pink layer, maybe 4 sheets of goldenrod, and you guys would write it out that way, and the seller would the buyer would pull out their checkbook and say, how much earnest money deposit, how much money is in your bank account? Give me all of it, right? And you would start writing it down and they'd hand you a check. And so that's the way the contract was constructed. It says the buyer has deposited X number of dollars with and it was typically the buyer brokerage anyway, as an earnest money deposit. And that's what it said. Well, it started to be that we weren't doing it that way, whether it was by fax or by email. Really, when we started getting into DocuSign contracts, contract could get ratified. It'd fly through cyberspace. Everybody would click the blanks to sign. And it was like, well, what about the money? Where is this earnest money deposit? Well, it's not really here yet. Now they've got to mail a check, or now they've got to send a wire, or nowadays they got to use an app, right? So we added language it says the buyer has delivered or will deliver the escrow agent by, and we give them a number of days, right? So the question that we used to get frequently was if there was no deposit. Say I got delivered a contract and it said that the title company was going to have the check. I never got a check. And the seller would ask me, well, what do I do? I'm like, well, we don't have a contract. Until that deposit actually arrives somewhere, we don't have a contract because the contract says it has been delivered. That's a fact. It's not true. And so because that's not actually a true item, until that becomes true, this isn't really a contract. The contract is void ab initio, right? It doesn't exist. You can treat it as if it doesn't exist. And all you need to do is write a note saying, hey, your offer is rejected because you never had a ratified contract because it was void, right? And you could just say you're gone and never got your money. With the new contract, oh, the deposit didn't come. That means the contract's void, right? And I can just give them notice that I'm voiding it and move on to the next contract. I'm like, actually, no. It's not void now. Now it's not a condition precedent, right? It's a term of the contract. It will be delivered by blank days. And so it's a breach, right? If it says I'll deliver the deposit to the escrow agent by 3 days after ratification, then on the fourth day, if the buyer hasn't done that, they've breached the contract. Well, okay, great. They breached the contract. What's my remedy? I want their deposit, right? Well, no, you can't get their deposit because the breach was they never delivered a deposit to anybody. All right, well, then it's void. Well, no, it's not really void because that's not what it doesn't say that. That's how we used to treat it as a matter of law in the past, but it doesn't say that anymore. So now, 5 years later, we fixed it. VAR fixed it, I think, about 4 years ago. And it says, if the buyer fails to timely deliver the deposit to the escrow agent, as provided herein, seller may, at seller's option, deliver to buyer notice to void this contract. Upon delivery of seller notice to void contract, all respective rights and obligations of the parties will terminate. Buyer may cure the default by delivering the deposit to the escrow agent prior to delivery of the notice voiding the contract. Okay, so starting on day 3, on midnight on the 4th day, because it's not 9 p.m. in this particular context, right? It's days or calendar days. We'll get to that in a minute. But the minute that it's not there, the seller may decide to void the contract. But until they do, the buyer can fix this problem by delivering the money. And once the money is delivered, even if it's late, there's no need for a remedy anymore, right? Because now the seller's whole, there's a deposit, it's in place, the escrow agent has it, and so you can't void the contract anymore. Now, that solves a big chunk of our problems. Does it solve every problem that you guys can think of? Probably not. I can think of a couple already, right? So if on the 4th day, the buyer drops a check off, a personal check at EKKO Title for $50,000 and says, but hey, don't deposit this for a couple of days because I need to move some money around to get into my account. Does the seller still have the right to void or not, right? You have to wait till the check clears. Well, what does that mean, right? Does that mean if they deliver it by check that it needs to be 7 days? Or unless there's any reason to suspect that there's a problem with it, is just delivery of the check itself to the escrow agent sufficient to meet this? I think that you don't need to wait for the check to clear. Unless you specify you want it in certified funds, it doesn't have to be certified funds. The other thing is it's impossible really to prove a check is cleared. Typically, banks will credit a personal check to your account after 7 days, but that doesn't mean that if it turns out to have been bad, that on the 8th day, they won't go back in and pull that money out of your account. So at least I can't imagine that somebody would accept the check. So the practical answer is, of course, you can always do all your closing with EKKO Title and you use our app Zocum to take a picture of the check and convert it into an EFT, electronic funds transfer, and we get the money in our account electronically. So that's the short answer. But there are still going to be some issues with this, but I think this is much improved. Robin wants to notice the seller delivers the notice to void. They also have to do the release of contract form. So it says, upon delivery of notice to void the contract, all right, upon delivery of the notice to void, all rights and obligations of the parties will terminate. Right? So it doesn't say you have to, it's just, it doesn't have to be agreed to. I don't think a release needs to be signed. I think the way this is signed, it says upon delivery of the notice to void, all rights and obligations of the parties will terminate. Now, it'd be good to get a release signed to say that everybody agrees that it was properly delivered, it was delivered in a timely fashion and everything. I mean, it's still gonna be the best practice to get that release form signed. But as the buyer still have to sign the release if they don't deposit the money. I think the answer is generally no. You don't have to get a release signed. You should offer to have one for them to sign, and then find out if they're going to dispute it. If they say I'm not signing anything, but fine, you're probably okay. But if they want to suggest that they still have a right to buy the property, it'd be good to try and get that resolved. Yeah, the answer is there's no deposit to be released. It would just be the release of contract that would be signed. All right. Settlement, this is a minor change, but it says pursuant to the Virginia law, the settlement agent is the sole agent responsible for conducting the settlement as defined in the Virginia Code. Delivery of required funds and executed documents to the settlement agent will constitute sufficient tender of performance. All right, what this means is, this was the question earlier about what if they said they were paying all cash and they wrote on page 1, they're making the 100% of the down payment as their down payment, and they get a loan, even if they didn't need an appraisal to come by, they could do a drive-by appraisal, they never needed access to the property. Isn't that somehow a breach of contract? Well, what we say is delivery of the required funds and executed documents will constitute sufficient tender of performance. So the answer is it doesn't matter where the money came from. If they show up with money and documents at the settlement agent, then they have met their obligations under the contract. That's sufficient tender of performance. They've performed. So you can't sue them for breach, at least because you didn't like where the funds came from. It also goes to the issue of split settlements, right? Where you had the seller's settlement company wanting to take on certain roles or not wanting to pay for other roles or do certain parts of the transaction, like filing a 1099 or releasing the liens and things like that. This says, no. All the money comes to the settlement agent. All the disbursements are made from the account of the settlement agent, and all the title clearing requirements are going to be to record clear title are going to be borne by the settlement agent. If you have a seller employed a settlement company to help you facilitate your transaction, that's between you and them, but they don't become a second settlement agent. The other thing is, this is the bottom here, the seller has one job, that is to deliver the executed documents to the settlement agent on or before the day of settlement. That's all you need to do to perform, right? I need to deliver the documents to, now there's other things you could do to breach it, but that's the main job. For those of you doing split settlements, I've not seen anybody actually follow through with this, but in theory, if you do your settlement, you sign at the settlement company, your seller settlement company the morning of, and they decide to FedEx the deed to the settlement, to the buyer's settlement company the next day. A lot of people say, what's the harm? If we delay settlement, if we delay, recording, I'm the one who suffers, right? It means my payoffs and my wire don't go out for an extra day, but what difference does it make? Here's a copy of it, it's signed. Well, if it doesn't, if it's not there on the settlement date, then the seller hasn't performed, right? They haven't actually delivered the deed. So if you have a case of buyer's remorse, right, or buyer didn't have any outs or anything else, and they sucked it up and went through it, but they really didn't want to, then when you haven't performed on the settlement date, arguably you're in breach of contract. And I don't know, again, what the best remedy for that would be, but I'd be careful, or they might be entitled to damages or something else. So try and get the deed there on time. All right, let's do a quick poll about this because I've been talking for too long. Split settlements. Most of this is frankly for my own curiosity, and if you don't feel like you need to answer, you don't have to. But do you guys like split settlements for your seller? And there's yes for one or the other reason, and no for one or the other reason. Do you like them because you don't trust the buyer's title company? Do you like them because your brokerage encourages you to use their company? Do you not like them, but you do them anyway because your brokerage encourages you to use it? Nobody's fessing up to those options. We're going with the yes and no. Either I do it because I don't trust the buyer's title company, or I don't because it makes things more complicated. So, by the way, I don't think I have any way of knowing, and I'm not going to certainly look for who answered how. I think these are just raw numbers, so I'm not going to turn anybody in. So, yeah, I mean, I see about a 50-50 split between the yeses and the nos overall so far as it comes in. I'll leave it open for another minute or two. Again, some of you probably don't want to answer, and that's okay. So, yeah, again, about 50-50 for yes and no. Some people really don't like having a buyer's title company to deal with. They like dealing with the same familiar people all the time. Sometimes it's not, I put it in the negative, but sometimes it's a positive. It's like, look, I really like working with the people that I use for all of my closings. I prefer to do that rather than work with the buyers. That's, I think some of those yeses are that also. And then the answer is no. And then there's also, as Maria points out, sometimes it depends answer, right? It'll depend on the circumstances. So I do find, to be honest with you, as much as I love working with all you all on every deal, seller sides can be complicated, and they can make things just more, and they can mess up expectations. I don't wire the money out, for instance, right? So if somebody says, hey, Marcus, I met with you on Tuesday, it's Thursday, where's my money? I can call a buyer's title company and see what's going on, but I can't force anything through, and I can't make that happen. And then it turns out, well, the buyer settled with a remote notary somewhere, and then the notary took the stuff back to their house the next day, and then they put it in the FedEx package. So we just got it to record, and then there's snow, and the county was closed. And so I don't have any control over any of that, but I'm the person that the seller has seen do their closing. They don't understand why I haven't gotten them their money. So I don't always love it, but I love working with you guys. So we will do it. All right. I'm on slide 19 of 33, but we'll go faster now. This is a really easy one. Paragraph 7, we took a bunch of language out so that we don't restate the entire code. We just reference it in the Code of Virginia, pointing up to that blue stuff. Let's see when my finger disappears. Oh, there it goes. But anyway, so we took that a lot, made it smaller, but it's still there. Nothing substantive has changed. We just went from a half a page to a little bit of a page for that particular bit of language. Possession date. Here's some interesting changes here. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing between seller and buyer, seller will give possession of property at settlement, including delivery of keys. Mailbox keys is new, right? I had this fight last week with somebody selling a condo. Said, nope, that's between you and the post office. You can get a new key, just go to the post office down the street, tell them you need a new key for your mailbox, and they'll give it to you. I don't issue the keys. The post office does, so get it from them. But there may or may not be some merit to that argument, but our contract says you give over the mailbox keys you've got at closing. Key fobs, codes, digital keys. Then, of course, the big caveat to all that is it says, if any, right? So now I've lost the mailbox key, or my tenant never turned the mailbox key in. And so I don't know what ever became of the mailbox key. Well, you got to go get one from the post office for me because it says mailbox keys, right? And I'm the seller, what do I say? It says, if any, right? So what does that mean? Does that mean, if any, if there's a mailbox that needs a key, or does it mean any key that you have? I should probably do a poll on that. How do y'all think that if there's a mailbox that's keyed, a keyed mailbox, you must deliver mailbox keys? Give me a show of hands, whether it's your hand or your reaction hand. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Actually, I can see if you guys can use the reactions on your thing. I'm realizing I can see that all in one place. Some people are saying yes in the chat. All right. How many of you all think that, and so you're giving me the X too. So how many of you all think that if there's no mailbox key because it's lost or wasn't given to anybody, even if there's a mailbox that has a key, if any, excuses the seller from having to deliver keys they don't have. Does anybody think that's the right answer? Some of you think that's the right answer. The Patrick Kessler says, what about the seller? It's what the seller has in their possession. So what I've identified here for you guys is a potential area for disagreement, right? So I think probably what, if any, means that if they're necessary, because key fobs, right? If there's no key fob because there's nothing to fob, I don't have to deliver key fobs to my single family house that was built in 1979 that doesn't use a fob, right? I think you have to deliver all of them that are needed to gain access to the property. But the if any could be read a couple of different ways by different people. So be clear about what they have and what they're willing to provide. I'd ask those questions maybe during your home inspection contingency period. Hey, do you have all these mailboxes? Is there a fob? Is there a code? How many am I going to get? And if you want more, you can make that part of your home inspection removal, or you just be clear about it. Or maybe someday we'll have to do check boxes, just like we do with other conveyances. Like, hey, are there keys? Are there mailbox keys? Are there fobs? Codes of digital keys. Here's the new language that's even more interesting than that, which is the seller will transfer exclusive control of any smart devices to the buyer at settlement, right? So that means if you have a Nest thermostat, you've got to provide them with access to it, whether it's giving them an app and installing the app and then giving them your password and then changing the password for them and deleting it from your phone so that you don't have access to that Nest anymore, right? Your Ring doorbell, right? How many of y'all have some sort of video doorbell or light or something outside your house these days so you can see what's going on? You know, the other issue about that, and I had some thoughts about that too. What if it's one of the stick-on ones, right? Like, what if it's just, well, we're going to get to that in a second, but if you have any smart devices, and we'll define smart devices in the next paragraph that we look at, you've got to give exclusive control to the buyer at settlement. We used to kind of only deal with alarm systems in the contract, but I think we've gotten to the point where we're trying to get that to smart devices. Whitney wants to know if they made a similar change in the post-settlement occupancy agreement. I don't think they did, but that's probably worth taking a look at. All right, so let's look at what we mean by smart devices. So paragraph 13, property includes the following personal property and fixtures. The new language is highlighted there. Smart home devices installed, hardwired, or attached to personal property or fixtures conveyed pursuant to this paragraph, including but not limited to smart switches, smart thermostats, smart doorbells, and security cameras, do convey unless otherwise agreed to in writing, if more than one of an item conveys the items are noted. So basically, we had to kind of pick a default, one or the other. We didn't have to, we did that checkbox, but I think this is one where they said, look, the assumption that most buyers have is that the smart stuff, this is the forms committee talking, the assumption of most buyers is the smart devices come with the property. Particularly smart thermostats. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like an HVAC, it's part of the equipment. Some of these other things, the doorbell, I mean, do you want to just leave a gaping hole in the door? Now, with a stick-on doorbell, is that the same or not, right? If you got the one that's just attached with like double-sided tape or something, where you screwed in a little, if you screw it in, then it's a fixture, right? So the answer is that they do convey unless otherwise agreed to. So if you want to take your smart thermostat with you, you need to say that in an addendum. You'll see, not in other terms. I keep saying in other terms. We'll find out why that's not a good idea anymore, but you need to say that in some sort of an addendum. All right, the other thing we did in paragraph 13 is we removed the no boxes, which is great. So you didn't have to worry about what it meant. I mean, it's sort of one of those like, duh, why didn't we think of that earlier? The following items convey, and just mark the ones that do, right? Why would we have no? So, because that no could mean a number of different things. Or people were using it to say it didn't convey without being really explicit about it, right? Or it's easy to miss a no box. Whereas now you mark yes, and then if it doesn't convey, you have a line to put it does not convey, right? So hopefully that's an improvement, makes it a little bit easier, makes it less likely to make silly mistakes. The garage opener with remote, I always thought is interesting. I never seen one without a remote. I guess there's some with just door inside, but there's no garage door remotes. But there's also the place to put the number of remotes. If you don't know where all the remotes are, you might want to put 1 or 0 there and say, hey, you might have to go and get your own remote garage door remote controls from Home Depot, programmable ones or something else. All right, paragraph 20, and we'll finish up in about the next 10 minutes, I think, unless you guys have lots and lots of questions. So the title paragraph has changed. So it says that the title report and survey, if required, will be ordered promptly, and if not available on the settlement date, settlement will be delayed up to 10 days. That's gone, right? And now it just says the buyer will promptly order a title report as well as any required or desired survey. Right? This one was an interesting one because it used to say if required, but we'd have questions about that. So at any rate, if you want one or you'd like to have one, you got to do that promptly. And there's no excuse essentially for not getting it done on time. So you've got to order it in time to get to closing. Fee simple title of the property and everything with it will be sold free of liens, except for any loans assumed by the buyer. Seller will convey title that is good and marketable and insurable. This is all old language, with no additional risk premium to buyer or non-standard exceptions. All right. Does anybody know what a non-standard exception is? Does everyone want to type their answer in the chat or unmute and tell me what they think a non-standard exception is? I think this is a term you should probably need to know now that we've got it in the contract. So title insurance binder will typically take exception. Barbara's like, I have no clue. Thank you, Barbara. Like, very honest. I've been doing this for 25 years or more. Never heard of what a non-standard exception is. That's a very kind of wonky term. The title insurance policy that your buyer gets will almost always take exception to things like taxes not yet due and payable, because those become a lien on the property. Standard easement. So Dominion Power, Verizon, the cable company, they all have they have that box on the corner of the property or whatever. They have an easement for that. We're going to take exception to the easement, right? So we're not going to guarantee you exclusive access to your property. We'll declare you exclusive access to your property with the exception of these easements, which grant other people rights in your property. So what's a non-standard exception, right? If there's a unreleased trust on the property, right? We'll take sometimes we'll issue insurance. We'll just take exception to that old loan. Well, now you've got free of liens up here, so you're kind of covered under free of liens. So that's not probably when it's going to apply. I give you the best example I can think of is I had a case in Old Town recently where there's a house and it had a parking space. The title of the parking space was actually part of another property, another lot, but they had an easement, a permanent easement to use that part of the parking area as a parking space indefinitely. The owner of the lot that was subject to the parking space easement, the lot actually belonged, the space belonged to their lot. They've given an easement for parking to my lot owner. Found out after he bought the property that the building was out of compliance with the zoning ordinance because it didn't have enough parking spaces. So what had happened was whoever built the building built it with a parking lot with enough parking spaces to get through the approval process. Then once it was approved, went ahead and granted easements to the owner of the house across the street to grant parking spaces. So now his property was out of compliance, zoning compliance, but we had a lawfully created easement, but the owner of the property was posting signs on the parking spaces saying, do not park here. Your easement's invalid. He argued because he's a lawyer, not really a lawyer. Well, it was invalid because it violates the zoning ordinance. No, that doesn't invalidate the easement. It's still a perfectly valid easement. You just have a problem. You got to go find some parking spaces somewhere else. So at any rate, there's a dispute over it. and there was going to be a pending lawsuit. So the seller says, I'm going to sell my house, but I don't want to sell it with a guarantee of a parking space. And I don't want to guarantee that you'll be able to have this parking space free and clear of a lawsuit, because I know that you might be sued over your ownership of the parking space. And so the title insurance company took exception, right? You have good marketable title. We took exception to the known risk that somebody might challenge the validity of the parking space easement. Paul makes another encroaching structure, right? Sometimes we'll take, if there's a garage that encroaches 3 feet, we'll take exception to that, meaning, hey, I can't, or you encroach 3 feet on your neighbor's property. That enhanced policy that says, hey, we'll remove encroaching structures won't apply if we've seen it already, we know about it, and we take exception to it. So you may have some eagle-eyed clients who want to know what a non-standard exception is. If they do, have them call me. You probably don't want to opine on it. We'll give them some ideas. But it also stops people from selling property. This has happened before. If you ever had somebody say, oh no, you've got to use my title company, they'll issue a policy. And so it's okay. Oftentimes they're issuing the policy because they're taking exception to whatever the defect really is. They're not really insuring over it. They're issuing a title insurance policy, but they're taking exception to the problem that you really care about. Time more on the title paragraph. The buyer will promptly order a title report as well as any required or desired surveys. And we added the date of ratification. So it used to say the date of settlement. So title may be subject to easements, covenants, conditions, and restrictions of record, if any, as of the date of ratification. So you can't put a new easement on, essentially, or covenant or restriction between the date of ratification and the date of purchase, right? And that's sort of common sense. But if you bought the property and then they slap a conservation easement on the back half, and they could deal with their neighbor to give away your driveway or something like that, you can't do that. So it goes back to the date of ratification. Paragraph 30 is the old Thomas of the Essence paragraph. I told you guys, and I promised at the beginning, we took out some old obsolete language, right? Every now and then. So every time something changes. So in 2015, we all were freaked out by the new rules regarding the CD. You guys remember when the CDs came out? It's been 6 years now since you had these CDs, and they had to disclose them. They had to be out 3 days ahead of time. And if the buyer didn't, go download their CD, then the contract could be delayed. Nobody knew what was going to happen if that happened. So we added this language that says if it's contingent on financing and there's a settlement delay necessary because the buyer's res patila integration disclosure rule is not satisfied, we're taking that out. Time is of the essence still. And we've all gotten used to it. We all know what you have to do 3 days before closing or 5 days before closing. Lenders have figured it out. If the seller doesn't open, if the buyer doesn't open their email and receive that CD in time, that still happens from time to time. If the buyer doesn't do that, then they have got to, they're going to be in default, just like if they hadn't done anything else they were supposed to do with their contract, right? So this is something after 6 years of working with the new res patila integrated disclosure rules, we think we figured out. And so we've asked people to go ahead and close on time. Any questions about any of that? All right. Another poll. I don't even remember what this one is. I just did these this morning. That's what kind of day it's been. Hold on, let's see what this poll is about. Oh, obsolete language. This is an easy one, just to break things up. Would you like to see more things removed from the contract? I see some of you have a sense of humor, want to keep piling it on. I think they did a pretty good job this time around of looking for places to remove some obsolete language. I would, how many of y'all remember, while we're taking this poll with a show of hands, how many of you remember, I should do another poll. I'm going to do another poll. I'm going to add one here on the fly. After we get this one closed, I'm going to ask you guys, how long was the contract when you wrote your first contract? How many pages was the contract when you wrote your first contract? All right, obsolete language. Okay, so yeah, about half of you guys there. Let me see if I can do a new poll from here. Let me edit this poll, see if I can add a new question. Bear with me guys for a second. Get a cup of coffee, take a restroom break or something like that. I'm going to create a new poll here. I can do it. All right, I've got a new poll, which I'm going to launch here in just a second because I'm curious about it now. Let's see. It says untitled poll. We can do it. All right. Launching one more poll here for you guys. And then we'll wrap up with a couple more slides and let you guys get on with your Friday, your snowy Fridays in January. So how long was the first real estate contract you ever ratified? I see some people remember the old 2-page contracts. A good, decent number of y'all were doing business when it was 3 to 5. I did 6 to 10. I think there was a 9-page contract. The 1999 contract was maybe 8 or 9. I know it went over 10 when we increased the font size. And then the only way we've actually made it shorter is we've pulled things out and put them into addenda. So it's kind of a trick question. Although we put the jurisdictional addenda back in. Susan remembers when DC was 1. So I didn't even get the 1-page contract. Mary Ellen's like, it's been so long, I don't even remember. All right, I'm going to end the poll there. So yeah, looks like some of y'all are relatively new. Some of y'all have been around since before it was 10. Some of you guys are old timers and remember when it was really short. All right. The other terms has been removed because it encourages realtors to practice law by drafting language according to MVAR. I'm not sure how writing up in a blank addendum is practicing law any less, but at any rate, we've got you guys doing it, not in the other terms paragraph, but in a regular addenda. Home inspection and radon contingency addendum itself. This is another change. I would put this, if I would do the classic, I would move this back with the home inspection removal stuff and access. But because this really is sort of an access issue, this new language says for the purposes of this home inspection contingency, inspection does not include radon testing, well inspection, or septic inspection, unless otherwise agreed to by separate clause or addendum. So for the purposes of this home inspection contingency, inspection does not include radon testing, well inspection, or septic. So if you want, yes, you can still do more inspections than just a standard home inspection. But if it's a home inspection that we have another kind of contingency for, you've got to use that contingency for. So don't have your home inspector drop off a radon test kit and then ask to come by and pick it up later after giving the impression that you were waiving radon, right? Because you didn't, because the seller thinks is, hey, if they didn't check the radon inspection contingency, they're waiving radon, even though it doesn't quite say that. And so then they'd be surprised. Or again, with well testing. Oh, they didn't ask for a well inspection. But then you try and push it in during your home inspection period. It's just about matching up everybody's expectations and letting people know up front. These are the contingencies that we expect to have, and if they're called for. Now, if you want to bring out an HVAC person in to do a specific HVAC inspection during your home inspection period, certainly you can still do that, right? And because we don't have a separate HVAC contingency form for you to use. So all we're really trying to do here is the home inspection is trying to get folks to use the inspection contingencies that are required. Sorry, I'm trying to signal me to see if I want lunch. I'm saying, no, I don't want lunch. All right, does everybody understand what we're trying to do there? Again, it's so nobody's surprised by the inspectors. John's saying there's also, potentially, somebody says, no, you can't bring your radon inspector company. Well, that's fine. I'll just void. So you do have some leverage to get those, allow those inspectors to come in. But we're trying to get people to use the different inspections. We modified the right to sell listing agreements by changing the boxes. The optional listing information sheet has been modified with by removing check boxes. We have a new buyer offer cover sheet. I haven't looked at it yet. If you guys like it, by all means, use it. And I look forward to y'all's feedback on whether you think it's useful from both a listing agent's perspective for comparing offers and from a selling agent's perspective as well. So last poll, and then I'll see about dropping this thing into the chart for you guys, the form. If not, I'll have to send you guys an email. I'm going to try and get it into the chat for you. Last poll, I'm going to launch it, and then I'm going to play. So you have two options. Was this the best virtual contract class you've ever attended? Yes, or absolutely yes. My ego is stroked either way. So. I think I figured out how to create a link. Give me just 1 minute. It should come through. Here it is.
Hey, Marcus, while you do that, you mentioned a CE form at the beginning of the class.
Yeah, that's this form that I'm trying to get to you guys now. I'm going to drop it here into the chat. So if you guys want to get credit, here's the link to the form. Only to the people that said absolutely yes. No, I'm teasing, of course. Which was almost all of you. So yeah, so I went to the waiting room participants again. Hold on 1 second. I don't know why I did that. All right, does somebody want to go ahead and click on this link for me in the chat and tell me if it works or not?
It does.
It works. All right. So if you guys want to go ahead and email that, I'll give you my email address too. You guys want to email me back your forms? We will get you guys credits for 2 hours of contracts. Anything that I didn't cover that you guys thought we were going to cover, feel free to put it in the chat or to shout it out at this point. And of course, if you didn't see it now, because I told everybody to comment, so I'm going to post it one more time, so it'll be the bottom thing in the chat. Scott wants to know if this is the correct title. That is the correct title for the class. I know that we didn't spend a whole ton of time talking about financing addendum, but we did talk some about the financing addendum and how the financing works and access. And so that will get you 2 hours of contracts credit. So I understand the confusion about the title.
Hey, Marcus, I'm trying to get this from my phone. Can it be emailed to me, or do I need to get it?
You want to send me an email to return or to ask for the form? Go ahead and do that. I'm going to put my email in the chat one more time. msimon MSIMON@EKKOTitle.com.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, and if you can't fill it out online, you may have to print it and then scan it and email it back to me. But we'll try and get you guys as many of y'all credit as we can. Okay. All right, well, if that's everything, I'll leave this open for a little bit so everybody gets a chance to click the link. But again, send me an email too. If you're struggling with that process, just send me an email and we'll get you guys a form to fill out. All right, great seeing everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Marcus.
All right, take care.